Ever pick up like a prescription and wonder how that little pill got all the way from like some scientist's lab to your medicine cabinet?
Yeah.
It's a journey, right? Like years and years. And it costs a fortune. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes even billions.
Yeah.
Crazy, right? So today we're going to go deep on one like really important part of that whole process, patents.
Yeah.
They're like these legal things, right, that protect drug innovations and help companies, get all that money back that they invested.
Right.
But how long do those things even last?
Yeah.
And then what happens when they expire? And like, what's the whole deal with generics?
Right.
That's our deep dive today.
It's fascinating because it's these little pieces of paper, these patents, they're actually what drives the whole engine of drug development. Without them, we would probably see a much slower pace of innovation.
Okay, so back up a second for me.
Yeah.
So I get that patents are supposed to protect inventions.
Yeah.
But how does that even work with, drugs and pharmaceuticals?
Yeah. Well, think of it this way. You have brilliant minds working in labs all over the world, spending years, sometimes decades, researching and developing new drugs. And these are incredibly risky ventures.
Yeah.
Most experimental drugs never even make it to market.
Right.
So there needs to be a reward and incentive for companies to take on such a gamble.
And that incentive is the patent. Right.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It gives them a monopoly, essentially, at least for a while.
Exactly. A pharmaceutical patent grants a company exclusive rights to produce and sell a new drug for a limited period.
Okay.
This exclusivity allows them to set prices and recoup their R&D costs without facing immediate competition. It's like saying, hey, you invested all this time and money, so you get a head start.
Okay, so you get 20 years, but you spend 8 years just getting through trials and FDA approval and all that.
Right.
Suddenly, that window is feeling a lot smaller.
Precisely. The effective patent life for a drug is often much shorter than the 20 years on paper. And so companies are racing against the clock to make the most of that time before those generic competitors come knocking.
Ah, generics.
Yeah.
Sometimes at the pharmacy, they'll ask, do you want the brand name or the generic?
Yeah.
Those are basically the same drug.
Right.
Right, just cheaper.
Right.
So how do patents even come into that equation? Like, how does that even work?
Once a patent expires, other companies can swoop in and start producing generic versions of the drug. And since they didn't have to bear the burden of all that initial research and development, they can sell those generics at a fraction of the price.
So if it's literally the same drug, why wouldn't everyone just get the generic? I mean, there's got to be a catch, right?
There are some nuances. Sometimes there are very subtle differences in the inactive ingredients or the way the drug is released in the body.
Okay.
But in many cases, it's largely about peace of mind. Some people just feel more comfortable sticking with the brand name they know, even if it costs more.
I could see that. You get used to a certain pill and maybe you're a little wary of switching. But like from a purely economic standpoint, those generics are a total game changer.
Absolutely.
Like what does that even do for the company that invented the drug? That's got to be a huge shift for them.
Absolutely. The entry of generics can lead to a dramatic drop in sales for the brand name drug. It's a classic case of balancing innovation and affordability.
So let's talk about some challenges then. I mean, even when a drug has patent protection, it's not always smooth sailing. Right? Like, I mean, some drugs just have these like unique characteristics that might need tweaking even after they're already on the market. And like our research mentioned, this drug, griselfulvin, it's used for fungal infections and has all these like quirks with the dosage and how it dissolves, impacting how much your body actually absorbs.
Right.
How does that play into this whole patent game? I mean, that's got to be tricky.
That's where things get really interesting, right? So even with that precious patent protection, companies might still face this urgency to improve their drug, right? Take griselfulvin, for example.
Okay.
Knowing that their patent window is limited, they might be racing to make improvements, maybe finding ways to enhance the formulation so more of the drug gets absorbed, all while battling the clock before generics hit the market.
So even with a patent, they're still under pressure to innovate and refine. It never stops, really.
It's a constant push and pull.
Right.
And it raises a really important question. What happens when that patent protection runs out?
Yeah.
Especially for drugs that treat rare diseases or maybe don't have a huge market. That's when things can get ethically tricky.
Ooh.
And that's something we'll dive into more in the next part of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of pharmaceutical patents. Before we left off, we were talking about how these patents incentivize companies to invest in this like risky and expensive process of developing new drugs.
Yeah, and we were just getting to the part where things get tricky, like what happens when those patents expire, especially for medicines that treat, like, rare diseases, or maybe just don't have a huge market. You're about to say it gets ethically complicated.
It does. You see, developing a new drug, it's not like creating the next hit song or designing a cool new gadget. We're talking about potentially life-saving treatments here.
Right.
So the stakes are incredibly high, not just for the companies involved, but for patients all over the world.
So if a shorter patent life might discourage companies from investing in those, like, less profitable areas, how do we balance that with the need for people to actually get access to these, like, crucial medications? It seems like a real dilemma.
It is, and that's where the regulatory landscape comes in, right? With agencies like the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office or USPTO playing a crucial role.
So the USPTO, they're like the gatekeepers. They're the ones who decide which inventions deserve patent protection. I'm guessing that process is pretty intense.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just a rubber stamp. To secure a patent, a new drug has to meet a whole bunch of criteria. It has to be novel, meaning it's truly something new and hasn't been done before. It has to be non-obvious, meaning it's not just a minor tweak to an existing invention. And of course, it has to be useful, right? It can't just be a cool idea in theory. It has to actually work.
So someone got rich arguing over molecules. Wild.
It happens more often than you think. These patent battles can be incredibly complex, with teams of scientists and lawyers dissecting the tiniest details of a drug's composition and how it's made.
So it's not just lawyers arguing contrast law. It gets super technical.
Oh, for sure. Expert witnesses are called in to debate the molecular structures, analyze the manufacturing techniques. It's a real battle of the scientific minds, and these legal showdowns can have a huge impact on the industry.
I bet. Do we have any, like, juicy examples of these high-profile patent disputes in our research?
We do. One that always fascinates me is the case of omeprazole, the drug you might know as Prilosec. It's that popular heartburn medication, a proton pump inhibitor.
Prilosec. Yeah, I think I've seen commercials for that. So what was the drama there?
Well, back in the 1980s, the company Astra, now AstraZeneca, developed and patented omeprazole.
Okay.
It was a huge breakthrough for treating heartburn and acid reflux and quickly became a blockbuster drug. Naturally, when the patent neared its expiration date, generic drug companies were ready to jump in and offer their own versions.
Sounds like a showdown was brewing.
It was. Astra fought tooth and nail to defend their patents, filing lawsuits against several generic companies, claiming they were stepping on their intellectual property rights.
So these cases must have been incredibly complex, like diving deep into the chemistry and all the little details of how the drug is made.
You got it. Think molecular structures, manufacturing processes, the tiniest tweaks to the formula. It was a legal and scientific labyrinth. And in the end, Astra did win some of the cases, delaying those generics from hitting the market for a bit. But eventually, the patent did expire, opening the door for more affordable options for patients.
So in the end, it's kind of a cycle, right? A company innovates, gets patent protection, makes their money back, then eventually those generics come in and kind of shake things up.
Exactly. And it highlights how crucial research and development is for these pharmaceutical companies. They know that even with a patent, they can't just sit back and relax. They need to keep pushing the boundaries, always seeking new and improved treatments to stay ahead of the curve.
It's like an ongoing game of chess, constantly anticipating the next move.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of strategy, there's another layer to this whole patent game we need to talk about: data exclusivity.
Okay, data exclusivity. Break that down for me. How's that different from a patent?
So imagine a company spends years conducting clinical trials, gathering all this valuable data to prove that their new drug is safe and effective. Data exclusivity grants them exclusive rights to that data for a certain period of time, even if the patent on the drug itself has expired.
But doesn't that mean...
It means that even if another company wants to create a generic version, they can't simply piggyback on that original data. They have to conduct their own studies, which can be very expensive and time-consuming.
Oh, interesting. So it's another way for the company that did all the initial legwork to maintain a competitive edge for a little while longer.
Exactly. And it's been used quite strategically for a number of those blockbuster drugs we were talking about earlier.
Are there any, like, famous examples of how this data exclusivity strategy played out?
Oh, absolutely. One that stands out is the story of Prozac, the antidepressant that became a household name. The company, Eli Lilly and Company, developed fluoxetine, the active ingredient in Prozac, back in the 1970s. When their patent was nearing expiration, they came up with a clever strategy to extend their market dominance.
Okay, spill the beans. What did they do?
They decided to pursue a new patent for a very specific use of fluoxetine. treating premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD. Basically, they were repurposing an existing drug for a new indication, a new medical use.
So it's like they found a new way to use an existing tool and got rewarded for that innovation.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a marketing ploy. They conducted clinical trials, gathered evidence to support the effectiveness of fluoxetine for treating PMDD, and ultimately secured a new patent for this specific use.
So it seems like a win-win, right? They extended the market exclusivity for Prozac, which could potentially lead to even more research and development, and they brought a new treatment option to patients suffering from a condition that wasn't always well addressed. Everyone benefits.
That's one way to look at it.
But there's a but coming, isn't there? There's always a but.
Well, this strategy of repurposing drugs and getting new patents for specific uses has also sparked a fair bit of debate.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What are the arguments against it?
Critics often call this practice evergreening, suggesting that it's just a way for companies to artificially extend their monopolies on drugs that are already profitable. They argue that it stifles competition and keeps drug prices high for longer, delaying the availability of cheaper generics.
I see. So the argument is, it's not really a groundbreaking innovation, it's just a legal tactic to maintain market dominance. Tricksy.
Exactly. And this debate highlights the very fine line that regulators and policymakers have to walk. It's a constant balancing act, weighing the need to reward innovation with the need to ensure that people can actually afford the medications they need.
So this whole system, it's kind of built on a foundation of tension.
It is, and that tension plays out on a global scale, too, which is something we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. The question of how pharmaceutical patents affect access to medicine around the world, that's a big one.
Yeah, that's a crucial conversation to have, especially considering how, wildly different healthcare systems are around the globe.
Absolutely. The stakes are incredibly high, and the implications are far-reaching.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been kind of untangling this whole world of pharmaceutical patents, and it's gotten pretty complex.
It has, hasn't it? We've talked about how those patents drive innovation, how they impact affordability, and how they play this crucial role in shaping access to medicines on a global scale.
Yeah, and like you were saying before, things get even more complicated when we zoom out and look at the global picture. How do these patents even affect access to medicines in different parts of the world, especially, places where healthcare might not be as readily available or it might be more expensive?
Yeah, that's a crucial question. You see, a drug that costs, let's say, a few $100s a month might be manageable for someone with good insurance in a high-income country.
Right.
But for someone in a developing country, that same price tag could be completely out of reach.
It's like having the cure, but only a select few can even get it.
Exactly. And patents play a big role in that dynamic. It's a constant struggle to balance the rights of, those who own the patents,
Right.
those who invented the drugs,
Right.
with the needs of people who are desperately seeking treatment but can't afford it.
So what are some ways that people are trying to fix that? How do you address that global imbalance?
Well, there are a few different strategies that have emerged over the years. One that's been fairly successful is tiered pricing.
Tiered pricing. Okay, that sounds kind of familiar. Remind me, how does that work again?
It's basically a system where drug companies offer different prices for the same drug in different countries, based on things like average income levels
Right.
or the overall strength of the healthcare system.
So lower income countries get a discount.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a recognition that a one-size-fits-all pricing model just doesn't make sense in a world with such vast economic disparities.
Right.
One notable example is what happened with HIV/AIDS medications in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I vaguely remember hearing about that. It was like a massive global crisis.
It was. And facing immense pressure from activists, governments, and organizations like the World Health Organization, pharmaceutical companies started offering tiered pricing for their HIV/AIDS drugs.
Wow.
And the result was a dramatic increase in access to those life-saving treatments in sub-Saharan Africa and other regions where the epidemic was hitting hardest.
So it's like proof that these pricing strategies can actually work.
It really shows how collaboration and creative solutions can lead to positive change.
But I'm guessing tiered pricing isn't perfect. There's got to be some downsides, right?
Oh, there are definitely challenges. One concern is drug diversion. Imagine medications intended for a lower-income country with a discounted price end up being illegally sold in a wealthier country at a markup.
Oh, wow. That's terrible. So you could have a situation where these drugs are being taken away from the people who need them the most, and then sold back to the people who can already afford them.
Exactly. That's why robust monitoring and distribution systems are essential to prevent that kind of exploitation.
Makes sense. So it sounds like striking a balance is like a constant thing with this whole world of pharmaceutical patents.
It is. And another strategy that's gaining traction is voluntary licensing.
Okay, voluntary licensing, what is that?
Think of it as a patent holder, like the pharmaceutical company, saying, okay, we're willing to share. They grant permission to other companies, often generic drug manufacturers, to produce and sell their patented drug.
So they're basically letting other people profit off of their invention. Why would they do that?
It's often done with a specific goal in mind, like increasing access to a drug in developing countries.
Right.
And it often involves technology transfer as well,
Okay.
where the original company shares the know-how and expertise needed to ensure the generic versions meet quality standards.
Oh, that's cool. So it's kind of like a collaboration, like a way to get those medicines out there to more people without totally getting rid of the patent system.
Exactly. And it's been used successfully for a number of key drugs.
Yeah.
One example is ritonavir, another HIV/AIDS medication. Abbott Laboratories, the company that held the patent, entered into voluntary licensing agreements with several generic drug manufacturers in India and South Africa,
Okay.
which led to a significant drop in the price of ritonavir in those regions and beyond.
So it's a way to bridge the gap between protecting that intellectual property and making sure that people who need it can get it.
Absolutely. And it speaks to the growing recognition that global health challenges require global solutions.
So we've got tiered pricing, voluntary licensing. Are there any other tools in the toolbox when it comes to this whole patent thing?
There are. One that's particularly interesting is the concept of patent pools.
Patent pools, what are those?
Imagine a group of companies, all holding patents related to, let's say, a specific disease or area of medicine,
Okay.
coming together and agreeing to license those patents to each other or even to third parties.
It's like everyone's working together to use those patents for a good cause.
Exactly. And it can be really beneficial in fields where drug development relies on this complex web of interconnected patents. It can streamline the process, reduce legal hurdles, and ultimately make it easier to get those treatments to the people who need them.
I can see how that would be super helpful. Any examples of these patent pools in action?
There are. One that comes to mind is the Medicines Patent Pool, or MPP. It's a UN-backed organization focused specifically on increasing access to HIV, hepatitis C, and tuberculosis treatments in developing countries.
Wow, those are some of the biggest ones out there. How do they work?
The MPP negotiates licensing agreements with those who hold patents for key drugs in those disease areas.
Okay.
And they then grant sublicenses to generic drug manufacturers, allowing them to produce and distribute more affordable versions of those medications in low and middle-income countries.
So they're kind of like a matchmaker.
Exactly.
They connect the people who own the patents to the people who can make those drugs more affordable.
Exactly. And their work has had a profound impact, improving the lives of countless people around the world.
It's really great to see these different approaches like the tiered pricing, the voluntary licensing,
Yeah.
the patent pools. All these are actually being used to address this really complex issue of balancing, those patent protections and global access to medicine.
It's a testament to the dedication of governments, international organizations, advocacy groups, and even the pharmaceutical companies themselves. It shows that there's this growing awareness of the need for solutions that work for everyone.
So that wraps up our deep dive into the world of pharmaceutical patents.
We certainly covered a lot of ground. We've explored how these patents drive innovation, how they impact affordability, and how they play this crucial role in shaping access to medicines on this global scale.
And hopefully our listeners are walking away with a better understanding of this whole complex world and how it affects them, no matter where they live.
Remember, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to your health. The more we understand about how things work, the better equipped we are to ask the right questions and advocate for solutions that benefit everyone.
We always encourage our listeners to, keep digging deeper into these topics that, spark their interest. Don't be afraid to do your own research, reach out to experts, get involved in the conversation.
And until next time, keep those minds curious.